Well, I say that when you have got creative groups, I don't really talk about this in the book because I thought creativity in groups was almost separate. I didn't want to
Yes.
confuse the issue. But that when you're in groups, it's absolutely essential that people shouldn't feel enough confidence to be able to say the first thing that comes into their head. Because if they're
Yes.
editing in advance what they can say and what they can't get, then the spontaneity goes and the creativity isn't going to happen. Which is, I think, oddly enough, there's a parallel to that with political correctness now, where people are thinking all the time, oh, I better know, how do I say that? It kills any kind of spontaneity. It has a disastrous effect on creativity.
It must do, and it must be. I mean, I believe that it's having a terrible effect on humor. I mean, we're watching humor sort of being suppressed all around us, because if you're having to think before you say anything, oh, could this viewed from a certain point of view be seen as offensive, then
Yeah.
you cannot say anything. And it's not just that it's uncreative, but it's surely very damaging socially. Because if, for example, I'm with a group of Black people, in the past, I would normally have not even thought about the fact they were Black. I'd just have carried on, they're my friends, we'd talk. But now I'd have to be thinking, oh, I better not say that. And if I say that, it could mean, because of course this thing has now got so wound up, wokeness, that anything you say as a white person, whether it's complimentary or derogatory, whether it's, whatever it is, it's some form of abuse. So, the only way out of that is
piece on the BBC at the moment about the pronunciation of Kamala Harris, her first name, which the Republicans were deliberately mispronouncing. But I'm not absolutely sure whether it's Kamala or, sorry, I can't even say it now. But the thing
Kamala.
about, I thought it rhymed with Pamela when I first heard it. Now I don't think it does quite. The stress is not quite the same. But there was a thing called microaggressions, which is
Oh,
talking
right.
about the awful effect on people of microaggressions, like people not pronouncing their name right. And I wanted to say, since 1964, when I first went to America, the the Americans have always called me Cleese.
Yes, yes.
And I don't
Well,
know
you ought to
why.
have.
You wouldn't go into a shop and say, I'd like a pound of cheddar cheese, would you? Our Hispanic friends often call it Cleese, and I don't know where that comes from, but it's
Yes.
obviously rhymes with Cleese, But I've been subject to these microaggressions now ever since 1964, and I've never yet been taken to a nursing home.
Well, you ought to try having a name like Iain McGilchrist, which almost nobody can either spell or pronounce, especially in America. In fact, it's very funny. The first time I got married, one of the gifts was to my wife and myself, and my name had been engraved on a goblet. And because they couldn't believe that it was IAIN, they'd
Right.
written pain.
That's
I
very
think it
good.
was a copper plate I had been turned into a P. So I'm used to answering to anything that's in the area. I mean,
But
what
the
the
awful
hell?
thing is that this is regarded now by the woke brotherhood, sorry, sisterhood, sorry, siblinghood, by the woke siblinghood as a sign of aggression. And I've never really thought, I just pick ignorance, yes, lack of common sense, yes, but I've never thought it was aggression. And so they see every tiny thing about it, and that's why they hate humor, because humor is two things. I think a sense of humor is a sense of perspective, and they've
Absolutely,
completely lost their perspective.
absolutely.
But a sense of humor is something playful and is not something that's got to be governed by a whole lot of rules that you have to check with before you open your mouth. It seems to me
No,
absolutely horrendous. The only trouble is ultimately that they have spotted an important point, and that is that all humor is critical. You can't write a funny book about someone who's perfect. I mean, it's
That's
not true of
true.
puns. It's not true of
That's
puns.
true.
But if I
No.
if I presented you with someone who was wise, generous, kind, intelligent, thoughtful, not very funny. Somebody once said to me, "Show me a sitcom about St. Francis of Assisi, and I'll show you a bummer." Do you know what I mean? It's
That,
about Basil Fawlty and W.C. Fields and grumpy people and angry people and stupid people. That's what we laugh at, is foibles, human weaknesses.
it's
But they seem to think you could only laugh at someone out of a sense of aggression or pity.
well, I think it's important to distinguish between the people in these so-called protected groups, which includes just about everybody in the cosmos except myself and yourself, probably, John. But I don't think those
Do
people.
mispronounce my name, Ian, and they mispronounce ours. So I think we're in a little separate, very special category there.
Right. But I think the thing is that I don't think that the offense is taken by such people. I think this whole woke thing is people who are pompous spokespersons for other groups, and they get their status in their own eyes by being holier than thou about other people who may actually resent all this, who may think, can't you leave us alone? I mean, we're not that fragile that we're offended when somebody mispronounces our name.
It's the
Because you would
fragility.
have to be really feeble, wouldn't you? I mean,
Yes,
to be upset about somebody. I mean, part of socialization is that you learn very early in family and at school not to take yourself so seriously. People will criticize you, people will say rude things to you, they'll call you names, they'll point out unflattering features of you, and you have to laugh.
yes.
I must tell you something, John. I have a lovely story. I hope my younger daughter, won't mind my telling you. But when she was about 6, she said, "Daddy, you've got a spot on your nose." And then she said, "But it suits you."
Well, what I've always pointed out to our
And
work friends is that
bless her, she was worried that she might have
yes, absolutely.
offended in this remark. You know, perhaps I shouldn't have drawn attention, but it suits you, which is rather fantastic.
Well, it's the kindness, but the whole thing that they don't understand is they see any form of teasing as
Mm,
aggressive. And of course, there is such a thing as nasty teasing, and it's
it certainly
horrible.
is.
We
I
absolutely
agree.
cannot do that kind of teasing, which is designed to make people feel awful about themselves and to humiliate them.
Exactly.
But an awful lot of teasing is affectionate. I mean, if I
Indeed.
greet you and say, "Ian, how are you, you silly old bugger?" You don't take that as aggressive. I mean, for the English, it's quite hard to say anything very affectionate about people. So you
That's
insult
right.
them so that they know that you must love them, because it would be
That's
bad
it.
to insult them if you didn't love them. Do you see what I mean?
The,
And these subtleties completely escape the woke crowd. And they think that because humor is critical, it must always, therefore, be painful. And they don't see how joshing, how teasing people with affection is actually a bonding mechanism that makes them
essential.
closer.
Absolutely right. 100% right. It's part of how we approach people and bond with them, is that we're capable of accepting those things, and actually they enrich the relationship. It's not like, oh well, I can put up with that, because one knows the spirit behind it is actually, it's true, we are all different, and I don't mind people making jokes about me that point up some of my characteristics. In fact, they're particularly funny, you know, because you sort of notice, oh God, yeah, that's me, isn't it? But
That's right.
it it's quite another matter when teasing is done in a debasing way. It's not funny, and it's boring. And what we're talking about is something quite different, but
Humor,
nuance. I mean, it's a
humorless.
nuance, and nuance has gone out of the window.
Yes, it's not about making people laugh in a proper sense. It's about inducing triumphant laughter, which
Yes.
isn't
Yes.
humorous at all. It's just
Oh
a
no.
nasty perversion of the instinct to laugh.
I mean, for example, I mean, people will say, "Well, it's okay. You're not not a member of any persecuted groups, but I am a member of groups about whom people make jokes. For example, I'm a Scot, and I find jokes about Scots very funny, and very much on the money. I'm also I don't know in what sense I'm a Christian, but I certainly take the Christian story and the Christian religion seriously. But
Yes.
the life of Brian, I mean, there's been one of the funniest, it's accompanied me all my life. It's incredibly funny. And only an idiot would consider it offensive.
Well,
So
I've come to the conclusion that the people who are most destructive are the literal minded. Try that.
100%.
Hmm?
Well, and that actually comes very close to the issue about religion, because the real differences there are not between people who are believers and people who are not, because most believers who are not maniacs are capable of qualified belief and doubt and areas of uncertainty, but areas of hope and things that call to them, speak to them. And people who are atheistic often call themselves such, but when it comes to it, they say, really, I'm agnostic. I don't really know, which seems to me entirely compatible with the best kind of believing. But the two people that you really don't want are the fundamentalist atheist and the fundamentalist religious person. They're the ones that do all the destruction.
Very good. I mean, I've always realized that, for example, people would think that I was anti-gay because I hate what Graham Chapman used to call screamers. Oh yes, all that stuff. But I don't hate them because they're gay. I hate them because they're exhibitionists. And the fact that they're gay is neither here nor there. You see what I'm saying?
I do, yes.
But I was thinking earlier, let me think, they're having trouble talking to you as I have too many ideas. I can't keep them in any sort of order. I think that your point of condescension that's built in to wokery, which is on stage I do jokes. I do jokes deliberately. This is a setup. I do jokes about Australians, Canadians, Germans, French, Italians. Yes. Why do Italians grow moustaches? Because they want to look like their mothers. You see what I mean? Lots of jokes like that. And then I say there were these two Mexicans, and you can hear a pin drop. I mean, within a second of the word Mexicans, everybody has frozen. Yeah. And I say, what happened to the audience? You see what I mean? And they start giggling because I pointed out to them how they reacted to the word Mexican. And I said, are we basically saying that the Germans, the Canadians, the Americans, and the French and the British, they can all take it because they're proper grown-up people and they can laugh at themselves. But Mexicans are such feeble, feckless, hopeless, talentless, stupid people that they have to have woke people to defend them. I say, isn't that slightly condescending attitude towards Mexicans, which is exactly the point you were making 10 minutes ago, but I don't think we can make it too often.
Well, that's right. And it's not just about humor, is it? Because I would be very cross if I were, a member of a racial minority who, due to my own hard work and native intelligence, had made it in life and got into, being a lecturer at Oxford or something. And then people said, well, he's only really been, I mean, they wouldn't say it, but they think, well, perhaps he only got appointed because he was pushed up the list, And I think, well, damn me, And I think it's very patronizing and downgrading to people to not give them the credit that they stand on their own feet as we do.
Yeah, which is a far more dignified way of treating people. Yeah.
Well, I think so. Yes.
Nice. Well,
but the thing about humor that's missing is that humor is also a way. The thing so paradoxical is that people are trying to stamp on humor because they think that will decrease tension. but actually it increases tension.
Yeah.
It
Well, the
does
yeah,
in
the
two ways. Number one is that humor, for example, is one of the great ways in which we decrease tension. It's one of the
absolutely.
ways in which we we're facing something that could make us anxious, and we get over it. We rejoice that we've got beyond it, and we laugh together, and that's great.
Right.
Um, and the other is what I was saying, that it increases tensions between groups because nobody can say anything unless they've subjected it to some sort of mental headmaster who will say, no, you mustn't, you can't, and 100 lines. And how can we have a normal conversation with all this stuff going on in one's head?
Absolutely. And I've always thought
Long
that
live humor.
long live humor.
Long live humor. I mean, in my pantheon, humorists, comedians, you and others are they're up there with the poets. As far as
Oh,
I'm concerned, the comedians, the great wits, the people who make me laugh are as important to me as the people who make me cry. You know,
yes. Yeah. 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 I mean, and some of they come from unexpected places and not necessarily from places of great education. For every Peter Cook, there's a Will Rogers. I love what Will Rogers was famous for, making very funny political remarks. And he once said, I don't make the jokes, I just point them out. I mean, that's just perfection. You know what I mean? And that kind of humor, for me, contains philosophy. You see what I mean? It contains a really helpful attitude to life. So
not
listen,
only does it,
yeah,
no, I
I
was just
feel.
going to say, I wanted to
Mhm.
expand on that because I think there's a lot to be said about that. I mean, yes, it is true that it teaches us in some way. It provides, as you say, very importantly, perspective, which I think is one of those underused concepts. When one was younger, people used to say, well, get it in perspective.
Yes,
And
that's
now you don't do that because actually, of course, a microaggression is supposed to be as awful as, a concentration camp. And I think one has to get our lives these days into perspective of what people in life suffer and expect and go through. We've got a fantasy world in our heads in which, out of sentimentality, we think that people can be spared certain things. But through this sentimentality, we're actually creating a joyless, hostile world in which, all the things that really matter to me, spontaneity, generosity, love, are being driven to the corners. And the reason I think that humor and poetry have a lot in common is that they're both absolutely dependent on the implicit. They are making connections
right.
that you
That's
don't make explicitly. And what happens in the poem and what happens in the joke is that something is short circuited that you haven't seen before. And in the one case, it makes you laugh. In the other case, it brings a sense of sort of deepness. But these things are very important. And they're, no, I don't want to crack on about the hemispheres, but they're both, as it happens, highly dependent on the right frontal lobe, which is also the seat of empathy. It's the part of the brain with which we empathize, with which we
good.
make humor, and with which we appreciate poetry. The implicit making connections, sensitivity to context, flexibility, being easy with uncertainty, all these important things, not dogmatism, not black and whiteness, not explicitness. These are all things that the right frontal lobe appreciates. So for me, humor and poetry go together.